that if you're analyzing your life right now within some disturbing emotion, that 100% of the time you're going to make your brain worse. If you're stuck in an emotion, like you're frustrated, you're angry. So these people began to reprogram their brain and body. And all of a sudden, they began to act differently. Why? Because they installed the circuits. They began to think differently, of course. They began to feel differently. They were no longer feeling pain. They're actually liking themselves, right? So then if they're living by a different emotion, and they're feeling an elevated emotion before they're healing, before they were healed, they're not waiting for their healing to feel joy and gratitude. They're feeling gratitude and joy. Now their body's believing that it's healed because the body's feeling the emotion ahead of the experience. And if the environment signals the gene and the end product of an experience in the environment is emotion, you're signaling the gene ahead of the environment. And what do genes do? Genes make proteins. And what are proteins responsible? The structure and function of the body. Now you're literally becoming somebody else. And now you're turning down the genes for disease and you're turning up these other genes. So I started to realize that this reinvention process is exactly what we've always done. It's just that we get complacent in certain areas of our life and we stop. Now the last thing they had in common, the fourth thing, is that when they were doing that rehearsal process, that they had long moments where they lost track of time and space. In other words, they were so involved in their inner world of imaging that when they turned the light on in the room or they lift their blindfold up or whatever they were doing, they thought it was 20 minutes later and it was an hour and 20 minutes later. And when you're truly focused and you're truly paying attention and you're in the present moment, all of a sudden you will leave this three-dimensional reality. And when you leave this three-dimensional reality, there's only one other place you go, and that is the realm of thought, and that's called the quantum field. And that quantum field is where all possibilities exist, right? So they were connecting to a field of information that had everything to do with the first principle, which is that invisible intelligence that's both within us and all around us, personal and universal. It is the unifying field that governs everything material in this world. And if you're going to change something material, that means you got to get beyond your body to heal your body.
Right.
Because if you're your body trying to heal your body, there's one thing that we can guarantee: it's going to take time. It's going to just take a long time because you're playing by the rules of Newtonian physics. You play by the rules of quantum physics. Energy dictates matter. So when you're truly in the field and you're making changes there, then the downward cascade, neurologically, biologically, chemically, hormonally, genetically, is the side effect of what's happening in the field. So then you asked, is it possible then that people can heal that quickly in 1 week? Yeah, because what if they create an inner event that carries an amplitude of gratitude or joy or freedom, break through from the chains of the past, and when the body is liberated and you feel that elevated emotion, the stronger the emotion you feel from that breakthrough, the more you're going to pay attention to the image in your mind. And now you're beginning to brand new circuitry in the brain, and your body's being conditioned into a new future. And the stronger the emotion you feel, and the more you pay attention to the picture, the more you're conditioning the body over time to the future instead of the past. So now you keep knocking on that genetic door emotionally, then that emotion ultimately signals a new gene that upregulates that gene to produce better proteins. And the person then all of a sudden starts healing. And we have research to show that people can do that in 4 days. Signal genes to reduce cancer cells. And to signal stem cells to suppress, to go to active tissues and repair them and regenerate them and suppress inflammation. That we have research to show that you could change the number of brain cells you have just by doing this properly. Well, you come with a lot of genes, and they're just a library of potentials. They're just a storehouse of information of possibilities. So then you got to get the right signal, the right lock into the key that begins to select and instruct genes that cause genes to make different proteins. And you can regulate so many different genes, the same genes, you can regulate them differently. So when they upregulate, they start producing really healthy and robust proteins. And that's enzymes, that's tissue, that's structure, that's function, that's hormones. It's immunoglobulins. When they downregulate because of some alarm, when there's not a lot of energy for long-term building projects, well, then you keep doing that, then the body starts producing cheaper proteins. It's a different signal. It's not a time for growth. And so now to answer your other question, then it makes sense then that if you have been an experienced if you had experience of trauma, say, for example, and it's created the feeling of fear, and your fear is that it could happen again. And you don't know this, but every time you think about that future, that possible worst case scenario, and you feel the emotion, you're conditioning your body to become the mind subconsciously of anxiety. So now, all you need now is some cue in your outer environment that says it's unsafe, that there's damage there, that you're a victim, something's bigger than you that could have an effect on you. Well, now that feeling of fear is going to cause you to think thoughts equal to it. So the person then no longer needs the environment to feel that fear. They just have to have the thought about that condition now. And now they're literally knocking their brain and body out of balance by thought alone. And the body's constantly living in emergency mode. And it takes a lot of energy, a lot of resources to live in emergency mode all the time. And guess what system becomes compromised by it?
Immune system.
Your immune system. Why? Because you have two protection systems. You got a system that protects you from dangers in your outer world. That's the gas pedal. That's the sympathetic nervous system. That's the fight or flight nervous system. Danger, threat out there. Use all the energy because you gotta survive. And when you survive, you got to take care of your body. So So now that system can work really well short term. It doesn't work really well if you keep it on all the time. Because if you're mobilizing all that energy for some threat in your outer world, there's no energy in your inner world for growth and repair. There's no energy for long-term building projects. And energy leaves the brain and it leaves the heart and it moves into these lower centers because now you're tapping the body's resources because there is an emergency. But whether the emergency is real or imagined, whether your anger is valid or justified or not, that you're tapping the body's very energy to heal by doing this. And the immune system says, well, we're part of really the other nervous system. We're the brake. We're the clutch. We need to get into relaxation. We need to get back into balance again. And when we do, then we'll metabolize. Then we'll assimilate. We'll reproduce. We'll excrete properly. I can tell you without a doubt that if you're analyzing your life right now within some disturbing emotion, that 100% of the time you're going to make your brain worse. If you're stuck in an emotion, like you're frustrated, you're angry, you're fearful, resentful, and you're thinking within that emotional state. In other words, you can't think greater than how you feel. That means then you were thinking in the past because those emotions are a record or residue of the past. So we see people in the process of change that are analyzing in duality or polarity. That kind of drives the brain into higher states of arousal and further away from true change. So we've done thousands and thousands and thousands of brain scans, and we now know that there's a formula to create greater brain coherence, greater brain efficiency, to make your brain work better. And when your brain works better, you work better. At the same time, it requires a clear intention and an elevated emotion to begin to change your energy and to change your life. And nobody changes until they change their energy, right? So then how do you get a person out of resentment, frustration, into joy and freedom? Why would they feel grateful or joyful or free if the experience hasn't happened? So most people are spending the majority of their life waiting for something out there to take away their emptiness or pain or the resentment in here. Well, if they're waiting their whole life in separation or lack, then and we create reality, then the lack is driving certain thoughts, which is creating more separation and more lack. So teaching people then to begin to condition their body emotionally before the evidence takes place in their life is breaking a significant habit, right? Yes. So instead of living by cause and effect, now we're beginning to cause and effect. So the moment you start feeling whole and grateful, we now know your healing will begin at that moment.
Yes.
The moment you start feeling worthy and abundant, your wealth is coming. You know, you're generating a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of wealth. And so let's stop telling the story of your past and let's start telling the story of your future. And people who aren't defined by a vision of the future, for the most part, are left with memories of the past. Your brain is a record of the past. It's an artifact of everything you've learned and experienced to this moment. So most people wake up in the morning and
they start thinking about their problems.
Yeah.
And those problems are memories that are tattooed in the brain that are associated to certain people and things at certain times and places. So the moment the person wakes up clean slate, they start thinking about their problems they're thinking in the past. If you believe your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, well, there's a possibility that your past is going to be your future. Every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So then the moment you start recalling the problem, you start feeling unhappy. Now your body's in the past because thoughts are the language of the brain. And feelings are the language of the body, and how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. So people reaffirm their identity based on the past, right? And it turns out that the redundancy of doing that, conditioning only requires an image and an emotion. And most people are unconsciously conditioning their body into the familiar past, into the known. So now if you're in the familiar past and in the known, you're going to crave the predictable future. Right? That's the known as well. And there's only one place where the unknown exists, and that's the eternal present moment. That's the sweet spot of the generous present moment. So you gotta labor to get that person beyond the emotions that keep them tacked or anchored to the past. And yes, it takes an effort to do that, but if you keep working with the formula, you'll reach that elegant moment where there's a liberation of energy. And now your body, as the unconscious mind, the objective mind, is not believing it's living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, because you're liberating the body from that emotional state.